Why doesn't everybody give a big round of applause to Mike Leonard?
Thanks, everybody.
And maybe John Barstow, are you still here? I mean, you are integral, so come on up. What? You guys will probably have a better conversation than I could ever moderate.
Sure.
I can take that other mic there.
Do you want us on the chairs or just?
This is good. Yeah, this is
yeah,
good.
I like casual.
Grab,
this is
grab that
this
other
is better.
mic over there, would you?
Here, John.
He is Mike. There you go.
Can the lights come down just a bit so we can see the audience, or put the house lights on just a hair? Okay, great. Does anybody want to start right in with some questions?
Can I actually start with something?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. Before I take any questions, I usually like to ask people if there are any other 251 Club members in attendance, just by show of hands. See if we're in good company. Yes, there are quite a few. That's nice. This screening is part of a longer tour that I'm doing this summer, where I'm screening in not all 251 towns in the state, but many of them. And so I usually like to see how many 251 Club members come along for the show. So it's nice to see you. And I hope that the rest of you are maybe inspired to join the club, or at the very least
Is
start exploring some of Vermont's communities. So with that, I guess we can get to the regularly scheduled program. My mom is actually in the audience. Yeah, she has, her nice little cameo.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
For your support.
Yes, ma'am. I think the entire process, to be honest. I usually say that I never really set off to be a filmmaker. I had all of this footage from 2006, and I had this experience that I thought was pretty unique and special. And after, thinking and ruminating on it for the better part of a decade, I thought to myself that it was time for me to sort of share this story with others. And sort of also tap into some of the little story threads that I had started in 2006. And with that meant having to learn the craft of filmmaking. So I had no experience. I mean, you can sort of tell from some of the footage in 2006. I don't know how many of you got seasick or dizzy at certain parts, but I had no knowledge of this craft at all. And initially when I set off, I thought maybe I would write a book, but with that old footage, film really lent itself well to telling this story. And so I kind of learned from the ground up, and one of my biggest supporters, who's not here actually, Mary Rizos, who worked at the Vermont Folklife Center with us, sort of taught me a lot of the tricks of the trade. But I really was a one-person show for the most part, learning and filming and editing and tracking down the people. And one of my great regrets was the interview with Jerry Greenfield at the very end, or not the very end, it came sort of at the end of all of my production. And I thought at that point that I had sort of gotten confident in my skills. And I went and we decided to do the interview outside by the bus, which was a really nice backdrop. And the interview went really, really well. And I got home and I looked at the footage and I had forgotten to plug in the lavalier mic. And so I was horrified. So there was some very creative editing to try to get some of his audio. So, I fumbled along the way, of course. But I feel like I was able to put it together to tell the story I wanted to tell. So thanks for that question. Yes. Oh gosh, everything. The first cut of this film was 4 hours long. And when people hear that they're coming to a movie or a film about visiting every town in Vermont, I think they think they're going to sit through something that's going to take 2 weeks. And truly it could have. From 2006, I had over 10 hours of footage and lots of really, really fascinating interviews with people. One of my favorites was, there was in the town of Plainfield, which is near Montpelier, we interviewed these two 13-year-old girls on the fire station steps. And we my friend Sam, just sort of asked them, what are you doing here? Are you waiting for the town hottie to drive by or something? And sure enough, that's what they were doing. And so we have this brilliant interview captured on camera of these two girls waiting for their town crush to drive by. And we watch them drive by, and then we're sort of on our way. And I actually even managed to track down one of those girls, but she didn't really want to be a part of the film. And this was something that I ran into a lot, and I think it's very telling of sort of the particular time in kind of the digital age where we are. In 2006, people didn't really mind if a camera was shoved in their face, and they would talk to us in these local towns. But by 2018, with the advent of YouTube and things going viral and all of this, people were much more suspicious of what I was going to do with that footage. So there are a lot of really, really great interviews that I have from 2006 that I wasn't able to use in 2018. And then, a lot of other stories that just due to time, that 3 hours or whatever that I had to cut out from that initial cut, that are hard for me to get rid of, were very hard for me to get rid of. I had to cut out some of I like to think of them sort of as the Greek chorus, the sort of interludes of the 251 Club members telling their stories. I had many, many people who wanted to be a part of that, and I interviewed quite a few others, and they had to get cut for time. And that was sad, because for me, this project ended up being much more than telling my story, and it was really about how this club is special to lots of different people and the way in which they go about it, and how they kind of tap into their Vermont identity as a result. So there were a lot of things that I missed, but that one interview with the two girls was a pretty special one.
So
Yes.
Mike, what's the future of the film? Are you seeking distribution? Where are you?
That's a good question. Sort of, like I said, I never set out to be a filmmaker, and I also never really set out to make a buck from this. In fact, I'm probably very much in debt. But the future is still unclear. As I've started screening this, the intention was to screen this film in local communities around Vermont for the people that it's really about. And it's been really successful so far. So every screening that I do, people come up to me or email me and ask to do another screening in a little town in Vermont. So I think now I'm up to 27 screenings and counting for 2019. That being said, I think that the story has a universal appeal beyond just Vermonters and Vermontophiles. I like to think that there's something that everybody can relate to or wants to relate to with that idea of, tapping into a small community and feeling a part of something. And it's also very much a coming-of-age story, of course. So I hope and I think that there might be a place for one town at a time beyond Vermont as well. But the immediate future, and for those of you who want to see it again or have friends in the state who want to see it, I'm screening it tonight in Hardwick, which is 2 hours to the east, and then tomorrow night in Heinsberg, which is in this general area. And I have a few other screenings coming up, so I'm taking it on the road quite a bit. The question I get a lot is whether or not it's available on DVD or online. Currently not yet, but I think that will happen at some point. And if not then probably on Vermont PBS eventually as well.
Yeah, seems a lay down for Vermont
Yeah.
PBS.
Does the Folklife Center have its copy for the archive?
Not yet. I actually spoke to Andy, who's the archivist at the Folklife Center. The interviews that I conducted are so lengthy, and there's some amazing stories in there. And so I think that those will have a really nice place at the VFC. So
That would be great. Do you want to just mention what you're up to next?
I'm also
We're up into
actually
right
in nursing school. I'm in an accelerated nursing program. I'm changing careers, so that's keeping me very busy. It's probably more like 80% of my focus. But every time I do this, people are like, drop nursing, go with filmmaking. Well, I'll see. I don't know. Yes, ma'am. That's a good point. Being from Woodstock, we have 3 of some of the most famous, actually. You bring up a really good point. There are so many things about Vermont that are incredible and that could have filled a whole movie unto themselves. I often think of the woman up in Norton with the general store. I wish I could have made an entire film just about her and the story of that store. And as I started this project, people kept sort of directing my gaze to different towns and different things that they thought were interesting about Vermont. And if I had followed that, I wanted to follow all of these little threads because I think everything's interesting. we would have been here for 2 weeks watching a movie. And so what I had to do was I had to narrow my focus, and I had to use that 2006 footage to do it. So really, what I went back to in 2018 was what I had footage of in 2006. And sometimes that left out a lot of chunks of the state and a lot of really interesting things, which is unfortunate, but maybe that will be my next project, who knows, cover bridges. Maybe, yeah, we could work on something.
I mean, it's almost, it's funny standing here sort of representing the Folklife Center that Mike did the original trip and then did this, which is like, it's the ultimate documentation. Individual interviews, it's exactly what the Folklife Center is about. And he's done it, and I hope that we can find ways to help distribute it, depending on what happens. It certainly could be the keystone of our collection, certainly for this century. And yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
why didn't we think of it?
Yes, sir. Thanks, Darren. It's a friend of mine from high school, if you hadn't gathered that. There's a lot of questions in there, Darren. The town in which I settled or came back to was a very easy choice because I ended up living right next to my brother, which we had like a little family compound thing going on, which was kind of fun. And that was in West Fairleigh, sort of along the Connecticut side. Coming back to Vermont as a 30-year-old, after having been here in my 20s and going through this, was really interesting, and it's a very different perspective. And I think my perspective is sort of echoed in Sam and Julia's at the end and with a few others. I think at 20 years old, we were able to do this sort of thing, and it was very leisurely and fun and silly and quirky, and we didn't have to worry too much about other things. But as a 30-year-old, you're carving out a way to make a living and eat and have a mortgage or whatever it may be. And obviously, time would have been a factor to try to do something like this. Then, well, I made it happen, I guess, second time around. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that to be a Vermonter and have that shift in perspective is interesting, and I like to think that that's reflected in the movie. I often point out one of my favorite segments is the girl sort of halfway through the film in the middle, named Crystal in East Montpelier. And I think her story is a really important one because there's nothing extraordinary about her story. She grew up in a small town in Vermont, and she lives in the neighboring town, and she has a family, and she's a registered nurse, and I think that that's great. But I think that she really represents something about Vermont that's important, and that a lot of young people are struggling to make a happy life for themselves in this state. And I love showing and telling her story that you don't have to become a millionaire striking it rich to actually make it work in Vermont, that you can make it work here. And I think that she's also has this amazing transition from being a blonde to a brunette, and there's kind of this time frame, and I think the whole thing is kind of cool. But I like to always come back to her as sort of this slice of life of a Vermonter, over the span of 12 years, and see kind of how Vermont has changed, but really also how it's stayed the same. So it was a meandering answer to your question, but okay.
Okay, if we don't have any more, I've been asked by Lloyd to say, check your schedules. The next block of films go off at 1:30. And anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Thanks for
All
coming.
right.